Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Woods Collab Podcast. I'm Mike Woods.
I'm Nikisha Woods.
And we are the Woods Collab. Today we are here to talk to you about unhealthy conflict. We're going to talk about some things to identify if we're in unhealthy conflict and ultimately what we can do about it. So before we get into that, of course, we ask that you would like the page, subscribe, share the page, share the podcast with your personal and your professional network. So, Keisha Woods, unhealthy conflict in a workplace. Tell us about what comes to mind when you think of that term.
Well, I am a firm believer that people are either naturally inclined to run towards conflict in general or avoid conflict in general. Now, you might do both or either in a circumstance or in a situation, but some people are like, oh my gosh, this conflict feels so uncomfortable. And even if it's conflict for someone else, they feel very uncomfortable. And then some people are like, yeah, I'm going to debate, I'm going to win, I'm going to get out there and I'm going to compete and I'm going to say the things that no one else is saying because I want to ruffle those feathers. And so I think it's very important for who's ever watching this podcast to really identify, do you tend to naturally run towards conflict or against conflict? And does that change when you're in a workplace? So I'm going to ask you this. In the workplace, let's do that one. Mm-hmm. In the workplace, do you think that you tend to run towards conflict or away from it?
Typically, if I'm moving any direction,
yeah,
I'm going towards it.
Okay.
I'm going towards it because first you were about to say,
I was going to say why, because I was going to say why.
I like to communicate. I like to talk, and I think communication is the key towards any relationship, especially in the workplace. Mm-hmm. You got to be able to talk things out, verbal, nonverbal, whatever the case may be. You got to be able to talk things out, even if it's to get an understanding of what the expectations are. Mm. So when it comes to conflict, I look at it in a couple of different ways. And I think we've mentioned this before. It may depend upon how invested you are in the situation. Mm. So if it's you and I were working on a project, you're working on the project, I'm working on a project, but we're at odds. The end goal is for us to accomplish that particular goal. Now, if we have some type of conflict that's standing in the way, I'm going to accomplish the goal, but at the same time, I can't get to that goal if you and I are not addressing the conflict. I look at that like that will be a hindrance or a roadblock that's going to keep us from getting to what we need to do. So now, if I accept something that's going to keep us from getting to or doing what we need to do, I'm not going to reach my goal. So I have to address the conflict. And for me, I understand that sometimes conflict, especially in the workplace, it may come from a lack of communication. A lack of communication, a lack of rapport, a lack of understanding an individual, a lack of an individual understanding me. And that's why I say sometimes you can talk about it, because if you don't talk about it, or in your term, run towards it, it's gonna delay the inevitable. I feel like you always gonna have to go back to that. So it's either you address it now or you address it later if you're invested in the thing that you're looking to accomplish. Now, if it comes, I got you. So now if it comes to something I'm not invested in, let's say it's something where, let's say I just don't care about, or it doesn't make a difference, or is something or someone I don't have to necessarily partner with. Mm-hmm. Or I'm not, maybe in the moment I'm like, maybe I'm having a bad day. Maybe say, you know what, never mind. But if it's something where this person I'm working with and we got to deal with something, I'm gonna run towards it.
Okay.
And that was a mouthful there.
Yeah, you said a lot of good things. I'm trying to pinpoint some thoughts there. But I would say if I were to self-reflect on where I typically fall in the workplace, I'm going to say I run towards conflict in the workplace. And if you've ever worked with me, you're probably like, yeah, she's keeping it real. She's telling the truth. And I think that the reason that I do that is similar to what you have stated. It's really just making sure that we are walking away with a clear understanding. And if I don't understand something, I will literally say, I don't understand what you mean. I don't understand what you're talking about. Because I am being asked to execute on something that I have to ask questions. And sometimes once I get clarity, that is going to be a conflicting idea or conflicting thought. And I'm a very firm believer that if I'm in a room, that I'm supposed to be there. And so I'm going to, my mind is the reason I'm in the room. So if I see something, I'm going to say something and I'm going to speak up. And if I see that there could be a better way or a more efficient way or even a different way from a different lens that we can approach it, that doesn't mean that we're going to go in that direction, but at least I'm going to say that, which can feel like conflict or unhealthy conflict, depending on how long we stay there. Right?
Yeah.
And so when you think about conflict, what is the impact of when it's unhealthy, straight up eye rolling, neck swinging? You can swing your neck.
Typically not. I'm typically not a
hand clapping, some of that. But like, what do you think the impact of it is when we have unhealthy conflict in the workplace?
Yeah, there's a significant impact, because if we look in and say what conflict is, essentially is you're at odds about something or someone. So and generally it gives the appearance of this grand thing, like, oh, these two people are not talking. Maybe they're upset with one another. And that could be the case. But at the same time, it's just like you're at odds about something. And sometimes that conflict could be the stepping stone in order to build something great. So that's why, like, if it's unhealthy, that could be more of a reason to actually run towards it, to address it. So the impact of it, if there's conflict, let's say between two people, two teams, whatever the case may be, by it being unhealthy and it not being addressed, that impact that it has, that could lead to a lack of communication. We're not communicating. You talk about expectations. That means, so now the expectations, we're not going to get anywhere with it because we're not talking. Now, if we're not talking, how can we partner or go towards a common goal? So that's one thing. It could lead to a lack of communication. That's one type of impact. It could impact brand. That's one thing. So unhealthy. So now when it comes to brand later down the line, you may not work with that person for a while later, but now that person's going to remember that experience that you all had because you all did not address that underlying thing. So the impact of it, of being unhealthy, if it's not addressed, it could be lasting. However, if it is addressed, it could lead to something great.
Yeah, I definitely think that when there is unhealthy conflict and people, they can't put their best foot forward, because I'm not 100% invested in the thing enough to address the conflict, but at the same time, I am doing just enough to get by, and I'm avoiding conversations. I'm avoiding providing feedback on a particular piece of the process because I feel uncomfortable in this situation. And I think a lot of times when that conflict is unhealthy, it's because the conflict becomes about the person and not the project. Right? And so we're working on the project. Now I'm starting to think, well, you never this and you always that, some of those absolutes, instead of I am looking to make sure that we are providing the best product. And so when you provided this spreadsheet to me, what I think we can fix or improve with this spreadsheet for clarity is X versus you make terrible spreadsheets, right? And so I think that making sure that you're disassociating it from the person and making sure that it's on the project can be very helpful to minimize the conflict so that it's not unhealthy.
Yeah, and then even being able to get to that point, it's also key to take a moment and to assess if you're in unhealthy conflict. Because it could be something where we're going with the flow and then you just have a thought, say, I really don't want to do this, or I really don't want to work with that person, or I'm really not feeling how the communication with this other party it's been going. I don't want to be in a room with that person. That could be an indicator right there that you're in the midst of unhealthy conflict. So that self-realization, that self-assessment could serve to your advantage, to anybody that's listening out here, to say, hey, I'm in unhealthy conflict. So now if you continue on that way, it's going to just be a bigger load to carry. But at the same time, and that's not going to work in your favor. But if you identify and then start to think about some solutions, which we'll get into, that can work towards your advantage and doing something about it.
And I think a lot of times we feel that it might not be the right space for us or place for us because we're in an unhealthy conflict. Because there's going to be times in the stages of team development, if you're familiar with it, there are going to be times where you start as a team and you're forming and everyone is nice and loves each other. And then you start to move over to the thing that I didn't say to you because I was just trying to fill you out, now I'm going to give it to you, and I'm going to give it to you real and raw. And that's moving into that storming phase. And that's where that conflict is unhealthy, and it feels unhealthy, right? It feels just like a storm. So it's so important for us to really take a step back and not just think, okay, well, we just want to leave this environment, but how can we actually move from this storming phase to the next phase, which is called the norming phase, where things become normal and the dust starts to settle, and then we can start to understand how to manage healthy conflict. No worries, so we're going to talk about healthy conflict in our next podcast. So Mike, I want to know if you have an example of an unhealthy conflict that you experienced in the workplace that you can share.
Yeah, I've had scenarios where there was some ego involved, where other individuals were just not seeing eye to eye, as far as like, it could be of how their style was versus how my style was, what they expected versus what I expected. And there was pockets where you talk about avoiding, it went to a pocket where it's like, okay, you try to avoid that individual. It's like, yeah, you know what, coming in, do my thing, I'm out. But at the same time, that didn't lead to anywhere. So in order to get out of that, they came to a point there had to be a conversation. And that conversation had to be real talk. Say, hey, this is how I see the thing. This is how you see the thing. And it doesn't always mean let's agree about it. We don't have to agree with the thing, but it's getting to the point where we have that mutual respect. That mutual respect, that mutual understanding. And once you identify that, we were able to kind of move on about it.
Yeah, I had a situation a few years ago, and it was when I came back from maternity leave. So that's how old this story is. So our son is 15. So I came back from maternity leave, and there had been a process change, and I didn't know what the process change was, but from my understanding, I was supposed to be assigned a certain file. And so I went back and forth with this other employee on whether or not this file belonged to me based on my interpretation of the change and her interpretation of the change. And so we literally would pass this file back and forth from seat to seat when the other person would go to the bathroom. So we were being petty before petty was a thing, right? And so we had to take it to leadership. Leadership decided that I was right. Hello. And so the file went to this employee, but she had like a nasty disposition because she had to keep the file. And so it went to, I would hear her whispering about me with other people, just, standing super close to me. And like, we were grown, right? We were grown. And these types of things were happening. I'm like, dang, I'm being bullied. Like, I'm really being bullied. So I remember the day that I made the decision to run towards this conflict because it wasn't going anywhere. I talked to my leader and I let my leader know. I said, listen, I'm about to confront somebody. I'm not going to get into the details, but I want you to be aware in case things get a little bit louder than we had anticipated. So I just want to put you on notice that I'm going to go address an issue. And I went to that issue bless you. I went to that person to address that issue. And they backed down completely. They apologized, but we were able to clear the air. And from that point on, I didn't have any other problems. But if I had to continue to allow for the whispering and the comments and the eye rolling and all this other stuff that was happening, who knows what would have happened to my brand and how I would have responded and just in general. So I'm glad that I was able to address it, but I also had to be smart about how I addressed it so we weren't in the middle of the office just screaming and hollering. So yeah, it happens. I think it happens. And I think that a lot of times people don't realize that, even in a workplace, it can feel like a high school cafeteria.
Yeah, there's sometimes it could, but like you said, the key point is to communicate, because like you could have avoided it, and avoiding it wouldn't have worked in your advantage. But you said you were very strategic and intentional about how you address it. So you wouldn't, involve some others, and you had a conversation, and then it stopped and it got better. Yeah. So that actually that should take us to like some best practices in order how to deal with it.
No best practices.
And how to,
that's a different podcast.
how do you deal with the unhealthy conflict? So we talked about the communication. So, well, even taking a step back, the assessing and identifying if you are in a form of unhealthy conflict, and knowing that you're in that spot. It may be, I don't want to be around this person. I don't want to communicate with this person. I find myself avoiding this person. Or even if I'm in the same room with this person, I'm not feeling like I'm in a good spot. So that could be an indicator that you're in unhealthy conflict. And then I want you to talk about some things about what can you do about it. So you just talked about, then you gave an example of how communication was key and you wanted to do something about it. What are some other things that we can do if we find ourselves in unhealthy conflict?
I think it's good to know where you are and self-reflect on if you typically run towards it or against it. And if you find that you are the person that gets energized by these, these disagreements and these debates, maybe not everybody's into that, right? And just having that self-awareness to say, okay, read the people in the room. How are other people responding to the fact that I'm super passionate and super excited about this thing? And am I the contributor to the unhealthy conflicts? And it's not productive, right? I mean, we talked about unhealthy conflict being unproductive. So really just being able to read the room. And on the flip side of it, if you are the type of person that avoids conflict, it might be a situation where you're in the midst of it, whether you like it or not, and you're going to have to push yourself to become more comfortable so that you can address situations. So you don't have a Mean Girls episode like I had coming back from maternity leave. So I just think that the biggest piece is just understanding where you are and how are you contributing to the unhealthy conflict and what you can do about it, whether it's to pull back, how aggressive you're being or how you're showing up or how spirited you could be in debates and conversations, or if you are feeling like you're a victim or a part of this unhealthy conflict situation, voicing your opinion and voicing your thoughts.
That's good. That's good. And keep in mind, we sort of alluded to that. Think about how invested you are in the thing and say, okay, is this something I'm willing to accept or is it something I'm willing to do something about? If you're willing to do something about it, take it, address it head on, think about it, be intentional, be strategic about how you can address it head on, and then see if you could take it and then watch you be able to flip that in order to change to healthy conflict. Which is what we're going to talk about next week. So let's give a sneak peek about what we're going to kind of get into next time with the healthy conflict.
Yeah, so can you believe it? Healthy conflict is actually a thing, and it can really drive your discussions, your meetings, your productivity when it comes to what you're doing and outputting in the workplace. And so we're going to talk about how to make sure it doesn't get into that. It's about the person, name calling, absolutes, you always, you never, and how it can stay on the side of being healthy conflict. So that's what we want you to tune into for the next time. But in the meantime, we do ask again that you like, comment, and subscribe to the Woods Collab. And we appreciate you watching. My name is Nikisha Woods. This guy is
Mike Woods.
Thank you so much.